There was also a whole lot of lack of trust and communication because of a lot of divisions that were built into the industry, such as drivers who had taken the affirmative step of signing up for the waiting list, drivers who never did and could never, as a result, expect a medallion, medallion holders that have a driving requirement, medallion holders that don't have a driving requirement, full service companies, minimal infrastructure companies, to put it kindly. And then there was also a real problem of our state of our regulation because there were a lot of entrenched dynamics, again, with this 32-year system locked in stone. I think everybody also just knew each other far too well. There were a lot of stories about people that it seemed that there was just too much history between all of these individuals. There was really a lack of a working relationship between the industry and the regulatory body. That was a fundamental problem. There was a lack of effective venue for intra-industry communication. There was the Taxi Commission, but that was a venue where you had 3 minutes to get up and speak in public comment and not necessarily a free-form debate. And there's also an issue about a split of authority between the police department, the board of supervisors, the police commission, the taxi commission. Even today, the police have authority for criminal enforcement, and the SFMTA has authority for everything else. And we have not yet found our rhythm in working together, shall we say. We also have very archaic systems, including paper waybills. The police department's technology has always been a little behind. The waiting list was only reduced to an electronic format that was sortable in 2009, 31 years after it was created. Until then, or for the last 10 years or so, it was a scanned copy of a dot matrix printout, and it's very, very difficult to work with that. And also the lack of data that we had was difficult, and that's the next slide. There was a lot of assumptions that were made that made it very difficult to come out with any kind of a policy recommendation. Are drivers really wealthy and hiding their income? Or are drivers desperately poor and suffering under difficult working conditions? Can the waiting list ever be made to move? The Prop K advocates felt that this is a great system where a working taxi driver can earn their medallion, they don't have to buy it, and the people who are against it say this is never going to work. It's moving too slowly and it can't be made to function. And how is a taxi driver benefited by having to buy what they can get for free? There was a credible argument that not many taxi drivers can come up with $50,000 and that they might have credit history issues that would prevent them from getting loans. And on the other side, people said that, no, this would be a wonderful economic opportunity for drivers because they would finally be able to build equity in an asset that could support them in retirement. Then, of course, we had this whole debate about who's better than who else. Does someone who has had their name on a waiting list for 10 years, whether or not they were a taxi driver during that time, who has an expectation of a free medallion, should they be forced to purchase a medallion? And they also put it as, should they be forced to purchase their own job? A driver who never put their name on the list and has been driving for 20, 30, 40 years and can't look forward to a medallion to increase their income, where do they fit into this? An aging medallion holder who got their medallion for free without any expectation of being able to sell it or keep it if they don't drive, but they don't have any other income for retirement. So as a regulatory matter, we could take those medallions away, but should we? When somebody has been a working taxi driver all their life and they become elderly or disabled, it's a difficult equation. And finally, where's the moral authority of the public transit system and its need for revenue? Is it right to solve the city's revenue problems on the back of working taxi drivers? So you can see there were some really thorny issues here. And the solution to that was to sort of kill them with kindness, if you will. We had over 175 hours of taxi town hall meetings, and it was unstructured debate. I mean, I was the mediator, and I tried to make sure that there was only one person who had the floor at all times and that people stayed civil. And that was extremely effective. Whoops, there. I went through a lot of whiteboard stuff and a lot of brainstorming. There's a tremendous amount of brainstorming, and we would say, well, what about this? And someone would raise an objection, so we would try to, find another way. And because of the lack of data, about halfway through that process, and because half the room was saying that the sky is blue and the half was saying the sky was yellow, I just didn't know, I didn't have the expertise, I didn't have the data in order to make sound policy recommendations. And so that's when I decided to make this a pilot program, to limit it in scope so that we could learn some of these, we could find out what some of these data points are that we were missing. So we did that, and 175 hours later, we came out with what we thought was an operable plan. Not everybody agreed with it, but everybody was sort of okay with it. So, well, not everybody. Some people really wanted to go back to the Prop K system. But then you walk out of the room and you say, okay, we've just created this new animal, and you walk outside into the sunlight, and does anybody else recognize that this is, something legitimate, especially a lender? And so I found myself all of a sudden having to cold call a lot of lending institutions and invite them to come and lend money on this thing that they didn't understand, that doesn't have a physical asset associated with it except for a little cheap piece of tin. And this is a very difficult financial market with all the lenders having regulators breathing down their necks. They have to be very careful what they get into. We also, through the lending process, had to create the regulations, the contract forms, title documents, websites, brochures, application forms, and loan terms. And we did it. I have to fully credit a couple of credit unions who stepped up to the plate, and that's the Montauk Credit Union in New York and the San Francisco Federal Credit Union in San Francisco. And with them and the police and fire credit unions in San Francisco, and now I understand we have other local credit unions who are interested, they created a participation agreement among themselves so that now, I had lunch with the Federal Credit Union Vice President of Lending the other day, and she says now with all of the interested credit unions that we have enough capital to fully finance loans for all of our 1,500 medallions without having to go further. One of the things that convinced the lender under this climate was that the SFMTA board needed to make the contractual assurance that if they ever terminated this program and altered the transferable nature of the particular medallions that had become transferable, then they would have to purchase those medallions back. That doesn't mean, that only means that if the transferable medallions are made non-transferable, that we have to repurchase those transferable medallions, and that's another reason to go with a limited program. Now, that's nothing special. As you indicated earlier, that's just a case of eminent domain. But again, to make the lenders feel very secure, in order to make the board very, very aware of what it was getting into, we went back to the board in August and said, okay, we want you to fully understand that we're going to have to buy these back if you ever change your mind. So with that, the lenders were sold and we were in business. So some of the features of this program, like San Francisco, unique. So we limited it to only sellers who were 70 years old or older, and who have a permanent disability that prevents them fulfilling the full-time driving requirement. I was thinking about going down to 65. That's sort of logical, isn't it? Except for so many of our medallion holders are 65 or older that would have opened up the program to too many medallions at a time. So this program will continue until the participating medallions are sold. In my handout, I said about 150 to 200. Some of the sellers are backing out, or about 50 we had 202 sellers respond, and about 50 of them said they were responding on the basis of disability, and then only about half of those panned out. They, you know, we said, okay, so where's your medical records? And they said, just kidding. And some people, too, get right up to the plate and they say, you know what, changed my mind, don't want to do it. So we invited people, the 202 were invited to participate, and the participation is limited to those 202, but they are not required to sell until the day that they sign the commitment to sell agreement. The buyers and the sellers are matched by the agency. You don't choose your own buyer and you don't choose your own seller. Some people have not liked this. They want to sell it to their children. They want to sell it to their manager, whatever. But this is a very structured program, and the buyers are chosen by their position on the waiting list. So if you're the top of the waiting list, you're the first one to get an offer to buy a medallion. And the sellers are chosen on the basis of their age and their need. We have some sellers who've come to us and say, my house is about to be foreclosed, or, you know, have medical issues, I really need to sell this right now, and so we've tried to prioritize those sales. There's others who have said we want to wait as long as we can, and so we put those off. The board appointed a taxi advisory council from the industry to monitor this and to recommend permanent reforms, and that body started meeting at the beginning of September and will be trying to do a report on their observations by the end of the year. The loan terms are amazing. I invite you to go to the San Francisco Federal Credit Union website and look up the taxi medallion loan terms. These lenders have been just incredible. There were first of all, a credit union is required to have at least 20% down on this kind of a business loan. That's a federal requirement. So that would mean that a taxi driver at the price that we selected would have had to come up with $50,000, but not all taxi drivers could do that. And so we built into the program a seller subsidy that a taxi driver could invest as little as 5%, and we didn't want to take it lower than that because they do need to have some skin in the game. But if the taxi driver couldn't make the $50,000, that the seller would subsidize the balance. So if the driver offers 20, the seller would have to offer 30. That amount of the seller's subsidy goes into a certificate of deposit in the seller's name. We have no more authority over it, control over it, but it has to stay there until there's 20% equity in the medallion. They're also getting 4% interest, so don't feel too bad for them. Some of them wanted to put more money in that account, but we said no, it's only for the seller subsidy. Buyer deposits as low as 5% down. A very interesting part of this is a fixed medallion price. And the reason we did that is because I really feared that if we put this out to bid, it was going to be like Google stock. And before long, you know, we were going to have $700,000 sales that were simply not sustainable. And so we tried very hard to look at what is the income of a driver, what is the economics of the industry, what can someone afford. And so that's really how we got to the price. Some people said, how did you pick the price? The most important consideration was the affordability of the payments. And a really neat part of this is that through the loan application process and the loan monitoring process, the credit union is actually doing some of the enforcement for me. They're making sure the workers' comp is paid. They're making sure there's insurance. They're making sure that all of these business expectations that were stated at the beginning of the loan are being carried through. And that is really going to make a huge difference in how these medallions are managed. So this is the evening of our last town hall meeting, at the end of a 6-hour meeting. And this is the day that we tied a little ribbon around our project and decided to take it to the board. And you can see that, and I'm very proud of the fact that most of the people in that picture are smiling. Mr. Mounsey here is on the Taxi Advisory Council now, precisely because he's not happy about this system, and we want that voice of dissent to contribute. He is a driver on the waiting list, and those are the people who are most affected by this program.